So hello everybody and welcome to the recorded part of the webinar. We've been having a little chat just back and forth. Today we're going to hear from Ben Woelk on a topic that he maybe briefly introduced at the improv sessions at the last summit, which we had so much fun with. So Ben, if you don't know Ben, I think many of us know Ben. He's currently the vice president of STC on the board, which means that starting in May, he'll move up to become president of STC. Ben has received numerous awards. You can read all about it on benwoelk.com. The most exciting thing I think about Ben right now is that he's got a podcast going, and so he communicates with us, and you can hear his actual voice talking to us on a regular basis, which I think is just so nerdy and so cool. So Ben, whenever you're ready.
Sure. It's actually much harder for me to listen to as I edit it over and over again as well. Yeah, so anyway, hi everyone. So I really want to talk kind of the whole context around leadership and what we do when we're approached about leadership opportunities and how we look for them and things like that. And this is actually based on a blog post that I did back in May, I think it was. As Vicki alluded to, Jack Molisani and I actually co-facilitated a couple of improv sessions at the Summit Conference, and I suspect Jack and I are about the most unlikely pairing to do anything like that together possible. But I've expanded on that a little bit because what I found in talking to my friends within STC, who I've actually quoted in this presentation, so they're going to die when they see it. But a couple of my friends in STC, they really kind of look at life in a lot of ways as far as a yes and type experience, and definitely with leadership opportunities. And the idea is that, let's see if I can get this to go. Okay, so the idea is that what do you do when you're approached and asked to take a leadership position, or if there's something that you're interested in? For many of us, we don't say yes. We tend to be very guarded with our time, and we are maybe more careful with it than we should be, though I think people can rightfully argue that I'm not as guarded with my time as I should be, because there are very few volunteer opportunities I actually walk away from if I think there's any opportunity that I can make a difference. So just throwing the other bio slide up there, but kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about today. Part of it is how we understand what our strengths are and how we even get that feeling that we're fit for leadership, because I think one of the barriers is that we are often not sure. I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey in leadership, which is primarily within STC, although I also have leadership experiences in a couple of other organizations. Most of it's definitely been here because there is a limit to how far I can be stretched. I'll talk a little bit about how this yes and attitude towards leadership opportunities, how that's worked for me, and I think the differences that I've seen as a result of it, and maybe see if we can identify some success factors around, say, you want to be involved in leadership, and what are the things you need in order to do well at that. So we'll talk about a little bit about that, and I'd really like, once we get to that part, really like to throw that out into a conversation format so I can get your input on it as well. And then we'll talk a little bit about what would make sense for you as the next steps. Now, fair warning, in the Rochester chapter, we do a spring spectrum conference every year, and for the last 7 years, we've had a leadership program as part of that. And my take on leadership programs is that if someone comes to that leadership program, they're interested in leadership to some degree. So I'm going to make that assumption here too, that if you are willing to listen to me talk about this and talk with you about leadership opportunities, then you have some interest in service of some kind as well, whether it's within STC or somewhere else. So one of the tricky things for us is really assessing our value. common response, and this has been my response many times early on in the past, is there's no way I can do it. It's way beyond my comfort level. I'm afraid I do a poor job at it. There has to be someone else who can do it better. And that honestly has been was probably my approach to leadership opportunities that were presented to me early on, because it always seemed like something maybe too big, or something like, why would I want to spend my time doing that? And I was very hesitant towards it for many years. But the quote here, there's nothing we cannot do if we harness the power within us. So in terms of there's no way I can do that, that's probably not really the case. We may feel unsure of ourselves. That's okay. Part of my strategy around mentoring emerging leaders in general is helping them understand what their strengths are. And one of the ways that we do that is by looking at some different types of inventories that are out there and available. One is Myers-Briggs, which gives you 16 different categories of temperament types that you might be. There's the work of David Keirsey, who has a different take on it a little bit, which is kind of the one I subscribe to as much as anything. But the idea in general, you can see an Enneagram there, you see StrengthsFinder, DISC, but the idea in general is that I feel like the more self-knowledge you have about what works for you and what doesn't work for you, the more able you are to take on these leadership opportunities. Now, there are definitely barriers, and I would say in general that there are certainly legitimate barriers from time to time. There are times we absolutely do not have time to take on leadership roles. And honestly, I would rather someone refuse to take on a leadership role than say, oh yes, I'll do it, and then not be able to do it because they've had too much come up. So I actually do encourage people, if they know they don't have the time, I'd rather in many ways not know that we have that gap and that position needs to be filled, rather than assuming that position's been filled and we have somebody in it who isn't able to perform, isn't able to really fill that gap at all. So as we all know, we're in a very fast-paced society now. There are many, many opportunities on which to spend our time, and we have to make choices. Some of you on this call I know are very into various hobbies. I have found that as I take on more of a leadership role, that time that I've spent with hobby type stuff has shrunk a lot, because I've had to make choices around things. And sometimes, you know, family obligations, you may have choices you have to make there too. But the barriers I want to talk about aren't really what I would call legitimate barriers so much as really kind of self-perception type barriers. One of those is self-doubt. And I would say that every single time I've stepped into a leadership type position, I've had real doubts on whether or not I was going to be able to do it or not, and whether I would be successful at it. I may not project that when people see me. I may project confidence, but I certainly have my doubts and my concerns and my worries about whether I'll do a good job or I'll screw things up. But I would say that the self-doubt is a pretty normal thing. And I think it's just something that we have to grapple with and understand that for many of us, that's our first tendency, is that I can't do this. I don't have the skills. I'm not strong enough. What were they possibly thinking when they asked me about doing this position? The other thing that happens is the imposter syndrome. And I have not done a lot of work around this, but I know full well that I have this imposter syndrome. And the way that manifests for many people is the higher you rise in an organization or in a profession or anything else, in many ways, the more you know what you don't know, and you start maybe carrying around the feeling that they're going to find out. They're going to find out I shouldn't be in this position. I've seen or I've heard recorded interviews with department chairs and different academic institutions just going on and on about how they don't feel like they're legitimately in the role. And you look at their external credentials, and yeah, they're absolutely, you would expect them to be in that type of role. So there is a great book out about the imposter syndrome. I know it is an issue that many women in business face. It's also an issue many introverts face in terms of, am I really qualified to do this or not? So those kind of barriers, I think, are the barriers that we need to examine and really think about, and maybe talk with others about whether we've really got a legitimate self-perception on that or not. So I've quoted some STC folk in this, and this was as part of a survey that I sent back when I did. There's an Intercom article that came out back in late spring, which I don't have in front of me, but it was on leadership, and it had to do with the responses I got from several people about how they approached leadership, and all of them were introverts. And I think Elisa's quote here is very telling, because she says it's easy to look at someone that you see as a leader today and assume that they always had a plan. In my experience, not so much. Now, what that means is that for many of us, we look around and we see people in leadership, and they look like they've got it all together, which they may or may not, but they look like they've got it all together. And what we don't see is the path that they took, or maybe the arduous climb that they made to get into that position, in terms of the skills development and the mistakes they made along the way, and or learning opportunities, if we want to phrase it that way. But just kind of the experience that they have by the time you see them in that position. And I think it's really important not to assume that leaders are absolutely born with all of the gifts and skills that you see them in. Many of that development is through learning, and is through hard work, and through struggling through things. So I would encourage you, if you see someone who is a leader, don't assume they've got it all together. Don't assume that they're certainly high and mighty and have just arrived, and that you're back there somewhere and just don't measure up. That's my comment around that. Now, the introvert thing. Now, many of you know by now, obviously, I do quite a bit of work around introverted leadership. And chatting with Sarah Feldman, for her take on that is, introversion is not a barrier for being able to tackle any new challenges. It's not an excuse. I have a friend who has put together a blog that she does on higher education, and she kind of makes fun of people doing the Myers-Briggs temperament inventory and then relaying that, well, I don't do that because I'm an INFP or whatever the letter combination might be, and because I'm an INFP, I don't have to do that. So she kind of pokes a little bit of fun at it. But the idea, again, is that introverts can be leaders. Introverts can be really good, really strong leaders. And don't use your temperament type or your introvert or extrovert type as a reason for not being able to tackle new challenges, especially around leadership. So we're going to talk a little bit about my journey, not going into any great depth. Right now, I'm like Vicki introduced me, I'm currently the VP of STC. And that involved campaigning and all sorts of really kind of uncomfortable stuff in terms of being elected in that position. One thing I should mention, I don't have this in my slides, but one of my real characteristics as a person is I do tend to be very competitive, and I hate to lose. So if I do enter into something or go out for something, I'm going to give it everything I can. I don't believe in kind of doing a half effort towards anything. But my leadership journey, if I take it back just within STC, which honestly has not been all that long ago, the first thing, and most of it was through has been through the Rochester chapter. I joined STC back in 2006, 2007. Didn't know anybody, went to a conference in Minneapolis, didn't know anyone, didn't mix with anyone because I was an introvert and I didn't know anyone and felt very uncomfortable. What happened is I had a friend who was on the admin council at that point in time, and she asked me if I would consider being program manager. Now, the program manager for the Rochester chapter is doing very similar things to what Vicki is doing in terms of putting together this webinar series, but it was more live programming with speakers and things. And my friend Betsy, who was on the admin council, knew that I worked for RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, assumed I probably knew quite a few people who could be good guests for us, good speakers. And so I agreed, yeah, I can manage that. I think that's something I can do. That seems small enough that I can actually, small enough that I can do it, and I feel okay about it. So I actually did that for a couple of years, and the first year I actually was a co-program manager, so I didn't even carry the whole load myself. I was pretty good about procuring speakers. I hate doing the logistics around events, so the other person liked doing the logistics, so that really worked really, really well. So I got through my second term as program manager and conversations with our nominations committee, and I said, sure, I'd be happy to be on the admin council again, but I'll do any position besides vice president. Had no interest in the VP position because it was more of a public-facing type position. It was also co-chair of the Spectrum conference that we host up here, and there is no way I wanted to do that. No way I was really willing to do that. And so then I met with the NomCom committee, assumed they'd put me on for something. I'm not sure what. And then the ballot came out, and they had listed me as one of the candidates for vice president and Spectrum co-chair. And at that point in time, I was kind of in this awkward position where the ballot's already been published. I certainly don't want to go and back out of this now because it would be embarrassing for me. It'd be embarrassing for the organization. So I left myself on the ballot. That was a big stretch for me at that point in time. I did not want to be a conference co-chair. I didn't want to be VP of this organization. And even the saving grace again was that it was a two-person type position, and the other person had had a good deal of experience. So that year actually went well. Much to my surprise, I received our local Rochester chapter's President's Award. No idea it was coming until the president said, don't look in that pile of stuff. And then it's kind of like, oh, why is that? So I did well enough. I did well with it. And at that point in time, STC had gone through a period where the dues for the organization had been kept artificially low for a number of years. And there were financial strains and constraints, which is unfortunately not that unusual with a professional organization. And the next year, with the year as VP, the next year there were many people who did not renew. And we also had some really strong leaders retire at that point in time. And at that point, I had this role of chapter president kind of staring me in the eyes, headlights and headlights with a deer eyes. And I'm not getting that analogy right at all, but you all know where I'm going with it. At that point, I knew I was going to be the next president. I certainly didn't feel competent to do it, but I was willing to do it. Didn't know anything near what I needed to know in terms of actually running the chapter, and most of our leaders, our prior leaders, were no longer available, so really was trying to figure out things from scratch. One thing that was good that year is that I went to my first leadership program at Summit and connected with a number of people, and a couple of whom are actually on this call. Connected with a few people for the very first time, and we've stayed friends ever since, and we've been able to support each other. So we kind of developed that network where we had people to talk to go to. So that was my first round of chapter service. And you can see later it shows 2015 through 16, I played some other roles, started a mentoring program up here because I find mentoring is very important to me, especially in terms of working with students. And the 2 years prior to me running for the VP position, I was happily vice president and Spectrum co-chair for the chapter up here. Felt much more prepared than I had previously, probably much stronger opinions about what should be done and shouldn't be done, whether rightly or wrongly. But I welcome the opportunity. But again, this was a progression from going into 2009, 2010, and absolutely there is no way I'm willing to do this and I'll do a bad job at it, to being quite willing to do it and seeing it as an opportunity that I can contribute. So that's kind of what I've done at the local level. So you see my president years were 2010 to 2011. So at that point in time, it's kind of humorous because my spouse, Marilyn Woelk, was the president the year after I was president. And one of the reasons that she ran was because she didn't want me doing a second term as president because I was doing too many things, which she was right, and was way too busy. So I did not run for a second term as president. But what I did do was join the Community Affairs Committee and created an outreach team to support other community leaders. Having been in a situation where I didn't really have any mentors around me in terms of how do you lead a community, how do you get engaged in doing the things it should do, I saw the need that many leaders had in terms of having the support structure and people to talk to. So one of the things I did at that point was volunteer to be in the Community Affairs Committee, and I approached them because I had a vision of what I wanted to do, which was to basically build an outreach team and provide support to all of the community leaders and SIG leaders. Did that for a couple of years. Decided somewhere probably within a year of it that I did want to go ahead and run for director within STC, but I also, being an INTJ, which means a lot of planning and a lot of just ideas of what I wanted to do and figuring out how to get there, I really used that year to kind of become better known so my name would have more recognition. I ran for director in 2013, was elected, was the Community Affairs Committee chairperson for a couple of years, and for various reasons stepped back from the board for a period of time. We were facing some personal challenges, and I did not feel like I could provide the time I needed in that position. So again, this is one of these times where the external barriers were real. I recognized them and I stepped back from what I was doing. I didn't want to step back completely because one thing that I was really passionate about and I really cared about was establishing a scholarship for STC for students. And our first part of doing that was really putting together a scholarship task force. Tim Esposito, who's on the call, was part of the task force from the beginning. And we spent a lot of time in discovery, finding out what chapters were doing, finding out what STC had offered previously. So we spent some time kind of ramping up what would we want to do for a scholarship, and eventually put a proposal together for the board. The proposal was accepted, and STC now has a scholarship committee and is actively raising funds to provide scholarships for undergrads and graduate students in technical communication related disciplines. So I would encourage you, either when you renew your membership or just to go to the webpage, which I don't have the link handy, and give something towards that scholarship so that we can offer it and make a difference for students. So I did that, and during that period of time, I knew we were facing a lot of challenges as a professional organization. All of them are, demographics have changed a lot. People don't tend to join things forever like baby boomers did. And because of that, we have a different demographic and different type of member that we need to work with. So I felt like I could make a difference, and I ran for vice president. those of you who saw my campaigning, it was probably way over the top. Far more than I would have expected to be. And again, we'll talk more about that in a second. Hang on a second, please. Sorry, back, had to shush the office a little bit again. And I will be president next, beginning in Denver through the conference in Seattle the following year. So that's kind of the framework around the specific things I did in leadership opportunities. I would say I learned a lot about myself through this period and about what I could do. And again, what you see is it's a progression. It was really about a 10 or 11 year progression, which is probably pretty quick, from me being this very reticent, didn't want to get involved, didn't want to meet anybody, talk to anybody, person willing to do some leadership type responsibilities, to now being willing to be eventually the face of STC for a year and talking in front of hundreds of people and all of these things, which if you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have said you were out of your mind. There's no way I'm going to be able to do these things or have anything I want to do with it. So that's kind of my society leadership structure, the things I've been involved in. Now, what I've gained from that, couple of things here. One, I was willing. When I was approached about leadership opportunities, although I had much self-doubt, although I had this imposter syndrome, and earlier I had the picture of the scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz, and I use that picture in a lot of ways because I think it really kind of epitomizes me and my need for external validation for what I do. One of the things with the scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz is he's very clever, really, really smart, but he doesn't think he has a brain. And he's always feeling like he needs a brain. Now, for me, what that meant was, well, I'm doing technical communication, but I don't have a degree in technical communication. I don't have anything that says I can do it. So all I'm going to do is certificate in technical information design, which I was able to do because our university offered that at that point in time. I work in information security as my practice area. I'm not certified, have no issue with people having respect for the work I do, but for me, I needed to get that certification to prove to myself that, hey, I knew enough about what I was talking about. And that's kind of been my pattern, and I think it's a bit of a weakness, but I think it's interesting because it does show that I am not this supremely confident guy who's out there willing to do all of these things. So the fact that I was willing was really important. The experience has stretched me incredibly and made me realize that there is far more that I am capable of doing than I ever thought that I was. And I would say no matter where you go in terms of accepting a leadership opportunity, whether it's a small one or eventually a large one, it will stretch you. And you will probably be surprised at what you can do when you're doing it. And stretching, honestly, is not always comfortable. But the biggest motivator for me is around leadership has always been, can I make a difference? And if I feel like there's a role where I can step in and make a difference, I will often pursue that role because it's just hardwired in me that if I can make a difference in something or for somebody, I need to do it. It's just, you know, part of our human condition or whatever you want to say about that. So, success factors, what has helped in terms of leadership? What do I think would help for any of you? Again, stealing from another friend of mine, Tara Schaufler, who is security awareness person at Princeton University and who has since joined STC in the Philadelphia chapter. She's an introvert. You wouldn't know it because she's very sociable, but her whole attitude towards this was you push yourself. You have to step outside your comfort zone or otherwise you do not progress. And I, for one, think it's important to progress. And not everyone feels that way, but then again, you all have joined a call about leadership conversations. So I'm assuming you feel that way to some extent as well. Another important ingredient in terms of being successful is to have mentors. Now, I've had chapter president, I modeled myself after for a period of time because he was very outgoing. He always greeted people when they came. He was all, you know, if there was someone new, he was out there talking to them. And for me, that in myself, that's the last thing I want to do because I'm not comfortable introducing myself to people. But I knew it was a role I needed to play. So part of the important thing was taking on that role. But Joanna's quote here, and this is from the podcast that Vicki mentioned early on, you have to challenge yourself every day. And it sounds trite to say that, but if I didn't have mentors pushing me and saying you're great and you can be even better and forcing me to do uncomfortable things, I wouldn't be where I am today. Now, Joanna's interesting because she is a pretty high-level consultant at this point, and she was director of the cybersecurity program for EDUCAUSE, which is a higher education IT consortium nonprofit group. She did a law degree, and she said the hardest thing for her was speaking in public at all, and that she would pretty much be sick to her stomach before she had to speak. And her mentors kept pushing her, admonishing her, telling her that she was really good and that she could be better, and basically gave her opportunity after opportunity to practice these uncomfortable things like speaking. And through doing that, even though it's uncomfortable, it can be really painful at times, she doesn't believe she'd be where she is today. And she's really a pretty high-powered consultant at this point in time, though she wouldn't think so. Another key facet about the leadership piece is it's really not about you. And I almost had this built-in rule of thumb that if somebody really, really strongly wanted to be a leader, they needed to wait, because I always question the motives. And I recognize that's probably a bit short-sighted. But I worry about people who want to be leaders and who want to be leaders because they want to be in control of things or in charge of things, to be able to tell people what to do. So Sarah's quote, "The most respected leaders are often those who don't lead with their ego, are willing to admit mistakes, and don't take things too personally," this holds true for both extroverts and introverts. Focus on the team and results, because the best leaders know it's not about them anyway. And I think that's really important. For me, I have received accolades for my leadership, but I wasn't seeking those. It was not why I've done things, and I was stunned and surprised anytime that somebody recognizes any of the work that I've done. I just don't expect it because it's not in my thinking. It's not why I'm doing it. But it's important because, yes, I've received recognition, but I really like this quote. A leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say we did it ourselves. And for me, when I'm in leadership opportunities, this is really what I want to have happen. I want to be the servant leader. I want to empower my team, enable my team. I want to give them the opportunities to have their ideas and share their ideas and operationalize their thoughts about how things should be, and be there supporting them, providing the mentorship they need, providing the coaching they need, saying that, yes, I believe in them. This part I think is really critical. And again, I want them, I'm not seeking the glory or whatever for the leadership part of it. So in terms of how this applies to you all, this yes and you and being volunteers, I would say the key thing is to find, most of you at this stage in your life know what you're passionate about. Find a way to harness that passion and serve where you're passionate. Find a place that you can make a difference. And if you are willing to serve and people don't know that, let people know who are in a position to be able to help you connect with the right opportunity. So my challenge to the group is really, where would you like to serve? You all have joined this call. I very strongly believe this quote by Albert Einstein, which is amazing. Only a life lived for others is a life it's, to me, that is that's the core of why I would want to be a leader is how can you serve others with it? And I recognize not everyone has that framework or attitude in which to work, but I see it as a service opportunity. So that's most of the presentation. Vicki had mentioned the Hope for the Introvert podcast. I do encourage you to listen. I think it's being fairly well received. We're up somewhere around 580 listens for all of the episodes released, and we started back on the 30th of August. So people are listening. It's been an amazing experience having conversations with leaders and hearing what really makes them tick and the struggles they have and the recommendations they have for others. So I do recommend you listen to it at least once. And then we're pretty much going to open it for questions. And I'm going to leave a connection slide up here so that you all see my contact information. And my apologies for the facebook.com one that's been clicked. But I'd really like to turn this into a conversation at this point in time. So what would you all like to discuss around leadership? And I see what else has come in here.
See, Tim posted the link to the scholarship page for STC.
Yep. Thanks, Tim.
And Jamie says she liked the quote from Sarah.
So any thoughts, questions?
Hey, all you introverts, you have microphone rights.
Yeah, disagreements. Yeah.
Can speak to us.
And we are 100% sure mics are turned on because I'm seeing them grayed out.
That's when they mute themselves.
Okay, people, unmute yourself. Don't leave me here dangling trying to talk by myself.
Okay, I have a big mouth. I'll start.
Go, Marcia.
Yeah, lifelong introvert, but I got involved with STC and then finally got to the summit and met IDL SIG and realized if I say I can do that, eventually I can. So part of the success of serving is serving with other people who have that same drive and are perfectly generous in helping you along the way.
Yeah, I think that's really a critical piece of this, and that has been my experience. And even new people who've come around STC, that's been something they've remarked on, is the willingness for people to help other people, whether it's with problems they're having with work or helping them serve and do things. We're really good overall as an organization, and our people are really, really good about that. So I think that's a really good point.
Well, and Marcia, she's the kind of person who she joined our leadership council as our secretary, and every time I ask, hey, does anybody have time to do XYZ, Marcia would always say, yes, I do. I have time to do that. I would love to do that. She said yes and many, many times, and now she is our assistant co-manager. So she's stepping even into more responsibility, but also I think more fun because you get to get a wider range.
Yeah, and one thing I would say in general, and I think with any organization, for me, you get out of it what you put into it. If you don't put much into it, then you're not going to get as much out of it. And obviously you may run into headaches along the way at time to time, but I never look back and regret the investment of time and energy and passion I've put into any of my leadership opportunities, whether within STC or outside STC.
Hey, Ben, do you want to turn on your camera?
Oh, God, I'm dressed up today, believe it or not. How's that for Doc? Which nobody will recognize me. So,
I put mine
hey,
on.
everyone, look. Coat and tie. You may not see this again until Summit. So, but I had a presentation I had to be dressed up for today.
Nice. So I just want to let you guys know that the cameras do not show up on the YouTube recording. So
Yeah.
feel free to show us in privacy.
Now, unless you're recording with Zoom, and Zoom does show the
Zoom
camera,
does? Okay.
so it's interesting.
Yeah, the GoToMeeting doesn't, so we're safe. So Ben, I just wanted to ask you about something. I don't feel like I'm a strong leader, but I do feel like I'm a strong follower. So I tend to implement ideas that other people come up with, but the ideas that I come up with are not great. I come up with stupid ideas. But if someone else comes up with an idea, I can usually make it happen. And so I always like being teamed with a strong leader, you know, so like right now I'm co-manager with Lori Meyer, and she's a strong leader. So I really appreciate that. I always appreciate that, you know, I get to be Tonto, I guess, and then somebody else gets to be the ranger.
Yeah, I think you're downplaying yourself a little bit. I don't think there's anybody in this call who would agree with you that you're not a leader.
I'm not a strong one.
Well,
I'm a very strong follower, though.
It's part of a team.
Yeah.
And that part makes it's so much easier to be part of a team doing these things. See, Kelly's telling you right there.
Kelly's another one who just we asked, you know, can we have a newsletter editor, and she stepped in and she just spanked it. She did a really great first issue with pretty much very little guidance, because our style in the IDL SIG is total empowerment, right? You're free to make your mistakes and learn from them, and we'll dig you out if we need to. But Kelly was just pretty much amazing. So
yeah, I'm all about and that's been my experience with her over the last couple of years as well. But I'm very much the total empowerment thing. I hate having to closely supervise someone. I'm not good at it. I just don't expect to have to do it. But to be fair, people who are first starting in leadership positions often need mentoring, and they need someone to talk to. They may not need the hands-on supervision, but it's really important to have that sounding board for different ideas and things.
Oh, people are typing nice things about me into the chat window. Thank you, guys. I do love you.
So any other comments, questions? You're still on the call, so I'm assuming you didn't think it was a total waste of time. So what are your thoughts? I mean, how does this work for you all? That's, I guess, really the bigger question. I know kind of how it works for me. You know, I know how it works for people I've had long conversations with, but I'm curious about your experiences. I mean, does this resonate with you about starting with these small things and having the mentorship and then advancing in if you're stretching yourself a bit? And you're welcome, Beth.
I've always had a hard time finding mentors. I've usually been a one-person team, and that probably kept me from moving forward with the whole writing goal. So I spent a lot of time in more customer service type roles, but was always writing, always doing the documentation, did some training and things. So I had this real scattered point of view as to what I could or couldn't do. And it took landing a job with the title for me to say, yeah, this is really who I am, and this is how I'm moving forward. It took a long time, but that's okay.
So, Marcia, I would invite you to join our Introverted Leadership Slack community. And there are almost 200 of us signed up on that thing right now. It is a great spot to share struggles and ideas and things like that. And you can see the link, you can see the QR code. I'm happy to send you an invitation. But there's several of the people on this call are part of that community as well.
I will look into it.
Other thoughts, anyone?
Kelly, we can't hear you.
Can see you though.
You look beautiful,
Hi,
darling.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Great. Beautiful and silent. Silent and deadly. Since no one else was talking, I'll go ahead. When Vicki was looking for newsletter editors, I mean, I've done that in my day job, so I thought, you know, how hard could it be? And actually, it's turned out to be really fun. I've gotten to meet a lot of cool people, not only within our SIG, but then, you know, outsiders by inviting them to participate. And then my local chapter, who I think I've only met a couple of them once in person, but I'm now their membership manager. And again, it's not a huge commitment, but it's just enough to sort of get my foot in the door. And then I feel like I'm more of a part of STC that way. And when I go to the conferences, I'm meeting more people, so I'll know more people. And it's just a nice way for me to get integrated into it. Because when I went to my first was in Columbus a few years ago. I didn't know anybody. I mean, I spoke to Lori Meyer because she must have noticed that I looked terrified, right? And she walked up to me. And that was just a few years ago, so it didn't take me quite as long as it took you, Ben. But you know, the roles I'm in, I'm not really in front of people. It's all done through email, and that's just more comfortable for me.
Yeah, and I would say you have a phenomenal president in terms of that Southeastern Michigan chapter. So.
Yeah, she's great.
And she's in Bora Bora right now, roughing it while we're dealing with snow. But yeah.
Oh. So yeah, I do feel like when I'm able to volunteer, I do feel more like I'm part of the organization. More like I'm with my tribe.
Mm-hmm.
More like I'm accepted. Less like an outsider. Even if I don't, you know, because sometimes I'll take on a job and I just don't do it well. I still feel more a part of the organization.
Well, I think that comfort level thing is a major thing too, because it definitely. I mean, I think we probably overuse the tribe thing, but I definitely feel that comfort level around my friends with STC. And when those of you who are able to go to a conference and able to go more than once, you look really, for most of the people, you really look forward to seeing them. You know, when you see them once a year or so, it's great. But that could be at a local level or just in general. It's that idea of people working towards a common goal, and they get you, they get us. When they understand the things we're talking about, they may read the same books. It's all sorts of tie-ins that kind of draw us closer together.
They care about fonts. They hate Comic Sans and Papyrus.
Yeah, maybe so.
We all hate the same things. So, sorry.
So any other thoughts?
I can't believe Tim Esposito doesn't have a thought.
Can you hear me?
We can
Yes,
hear it.
barely.
How about now?
Oh, very well.
Okay. Yeah, the microphone was on the headset. Yeah, Ben, I think you did a great job illustrating how you went forward and grew into society volunteership. And I have a very similar path. My MO seems to be get involved at a low level, learn how everything works, and then try and do that really well and get things going well, which is in line with what Vicki was saying. Maybe not leading, but taking what's there and making it work even better.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention in the presentation, was I actually pulled the slide. With the VP candidacy, there was campaigning, and I probably went way overboard with the campaigning because one person suggested, oh, reach out to 100 people and remind them they need to vote and get a few endorsements, and I just kept asking for endorsements. But what was really astonishing to me and very humbling to me was the notes that people wrote back about the difference that I had made for them in various things over the years that I had no idea. And so for me, one of the best, thanks Tim, one of the best parts of that whole running for office and was hearing from people about the difference, even doing little things, even just talking to them at a conference, asking how they were doing, asking how their community was doing, just made a tremendous difference for them. So that to me was the coolest thing with it, because I don't think we often have an opportunity to have any idea what impact we have on people. So it was very surprising, because I assumed that I have very little impact, of course. So it was just a very cool thing I wanted to share. And yes, many endorsements. Yeah.
So I'm reading in the chat. Marianne makes a really good point. I'll just go ahead and read it. In fact, recognizing that we've been trying to identify more small entry type volunteer opportunities at the chapter level to get people involved. So I guess it's up to us as leaders to just define some easy jobs, and that way people will have a baby step that they can take. Whereas, like, taking a baby step into membership manager or something like that, because right now the IDL needs a membership manager. That's kind of a biggish job, right? But coordinating one small thing, like something casual meeting at the summit, might be a small thing somebody could do.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Marianne.
Okay. Hi. Thanks. That sentence got separated from it was a follow-on to agreeing with the general premise that, yes, start small and build on that. And I think, we all do that. And I think that that's a very good way to do things. And that's why I was saying we were looking for smaller places, that people could start to get involved. And then that builds your pipeline too. But,
and kind of bounding the opportunities so they know that they're not signing up to boil the ocean, basically.
Right. One finite thing, and you learn that you can do that, and then you find something else that you can do, and then eventually end up on the slate for vice president and president. And
possibly so, if you've got just that little bit of craziness,
Yes, and as I also said in the chat, we are appreciating Kelly very much in both the IDL SIG and in Southeastern Michigan. And I'm excited for you all to meet Catherine Backerud too. I think you will meet her in this coming summit, who is our current vice president in Southeastern Michigan, who is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting her.
Yeah, so things are great there. And hello, everyone.
She speaks.
Yep.
Yay.
She's not turning her camera on, though.
It's safe here. It's okay. So I'm going to, my sense is that we might get more discussion after I stop the recording. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And especially thank you to Mr. Vice President Ben Woelk.
And you are quite welcome. Oh.